At exactly 0934 hours, the gray skies over occupied Donetsk tore open. 11 Ukrainian FP strike drones screamed low, flat, and impossibly fast toward a high-value Russian military airfield. Their objective was singular and vital: permanently halt the steady, unrelenting flow of Russian-shaped kamikaze drones that had been pounding Ukrainian civilian centers into rubble week after week, 40 kilometers behind the line of contact. Nestled deep inside a reinforced concrete dugout, the Ukrainian flight crew sat in absolute silence. On their tactical monitors, the distant Russian airfield grew larger pixel by pixel. 20 minutes to target. Every diagnostic metric read green. Everything was running precisely to plan, and that was the first real problem. Because this close to the most heavily defended drone base in the entire theater of operations, a flawless approach is exactly what the Russian defenders wanted to have. The lead FP to strike drone was just 4 kilometers into the designated approach corridor when the airspace around it violently ignited. Tracers tore upward out of a dense tree line. At first, from the drone's optical feed, the incoming rounds looked slow, a series of glowing dots drifting casually through the air. Then, physics caught up. The rounds accelerated, walking straight up a vertical path until they slammed violently into the nose of the lead drone. The FP-2 is a Ukrainian-engineered, fixed-wing strike platform. It measures roughly for meters from nose to tail, powered by a high-efficiency rear propeller, and carries a multi-kilogram class fragmentation warhead designed to flatten hardened infrastructure up to 200 kilometers deep. In a shower of sparks and shredded carbon fiber, the lead drone tumbled out of the sky, trailing a thick plume of black, oily smoke. It was gone before the remote operator could even register the drop in telemetry. Immediately, a second defensive position opened up from the far shoulder of the corridor. Then a third. What knocked that first multi-thousand-dollar strike drone out of the sky wasn't a sophisticated, multi-million-dollar S-400 missile battery. It was something far more practical, a Russian mobile fire group. It was nothing fancy, just a highly mobile, commercial pickup truck dug into a defilade behind the brush. A heavy, rapid-fire machine gun welded to the bed. It's cheap, incredibly agile, and completely lethal to anything flying slow enough and low enough to cross its field of fire. This was Russia's middle layer of air defense, exactly tailored for swatting down low-flying, propeller-driven composite drones. Think of these Russian gun trucks as heavily armed toll booths positioned on the only viable low-altitude highway leading to the airport. Except at these booths, the toll was your entire aircraft. But just as the Russian gun crews began to reload, the tree line completely came apart. A heavy artillery rocket, fired from an undisclosed position kilometers behind the Ukrainian lines, screamed down from the upper atmosphere. The lead gun truck vanished in a massive, roiling orange fireball that sent vehicle chassis parts flying over the canopy. Seconds later, the second hidden gun position took a direct rocket strike of its own. Then the third. Whoever was coordinating the counter-battery strike had the entire defensive belt mapped down to the exact meter. The FP-2 that had just fallen out of the sky had done exactly what it was engineered to do. Ahead of the primary high-value strike wave, the Ukrainian commanders had intentionally pushed a few cheaper, older generation drones directly into the teeth of the corridor for one specific reason: to get shot at. In the brutal logic of modern electronic warfare, an air defense fire group that stays hidden and silent is almost impossible to locate. But a fire group that opens up on a target exposes its position to the entire world for a few critical seconds. And in the 21st century battle space, a few seconds is all modern artillery requires to execute a death sentence. A slow, straight-flying drone crossing their path was nothing more than a clay pigeon. So, the Ukrainians fed them a clay pigeon on purpose. The exact instant the Russian barrels lit up, a high-altitude Ukrainian reconnaissance drone hovering silently above fixed its thermal optics onto the muzzle flashes. The coordinates were instantly digitized and sent via data link to an artillery rail that was already loaded, aimed, and waiting. The flight path was pre-plotted. The target area was locked. The only piece of data missing from the equation was the final, precise terminal coordinate, and the Russian bait just delivered it. More rockets rained down across the defensive belt. The mobile fire groups were dismantled one after another, and the air corridor swung wide open. Every truck that turned into scrap metal was one less weapon waiting for the primary strike wave. High above, the Ukrainian recon birds kept marking targets faster than the Russian crews on the ground could start their engines and scatter. It was a flawless tactical trick, but 40 kilometers back, inside a heavily shielded command vehicle, a Russian military officer watched the entire sequence unfold on a tactical nap. And he smiled, because the Ukrainians had just walked into a much larger, far more dangerous trap. Every single drone the Ukrainians flew to locate those gun trucks was actively emitting a radio signal. Every video feed, every telemetry update, and every command packet was a digital breadcrumb leading straight back through the ether to the exact bunker where the pilots were sitting. The Ukrainians believed they were the apex predators hunting down defenseless gun trucks. In reality, they had just become the prey. The officer was a specialist from the Rubikon signal intelligence unit. He hadn't deployed those gun trucks in the corridor to stop the strike wave. He had placed them there to be sacrificed. They were bait. Hunting those trucks required the Ukrainians to fly active reconnaissance drones. And flying active recon meant transmitting massive amounts of high bandwidth data. That transmission was the one specific signal he had been waiting all morning to intercept. While the Ukrainian artillery picked his expendable gun trucks apart, the massive, highly sensitive antenna arrays on top of the Rubikon truck were quietly pulling precise directional bearings off every single active transmitter in that airspace. A digital line settled onto a specific Ukrainian reconnaissance frequency. Kilometers away, a secondary passive listening host intercepted the same signal and crossed it. Where those two digital lines intersected on the map, a high-resolution grid reference populated onto the Rubikon officer's screen. He didn't just know where the drones were anymore. He had the exact location of the operators flying them. Now, it was a brutal race against time. He had to strike the bunker before the pilots could complete their terminal attack run. The complex antenna array bolted to the roof of the Rubikon vehicle did one thing better than almost any other system in the Russian armed forces. It listened. Every unshielded drone must maintain a continuous conversation with its human pilot. The Rubikon system catches that electromagnetic chatter, isolates the specific frequency, and draws a straight line back to the source. Think of every radio transmission in a combat zone as a high-powered flashlight being waved around inside a completely pitch-black field. The operator holding the light believes he's hidden because he's the one doing the looking. But the Rubikon is standing in that same field, watching exactly where the beam of light originates. The evidence was never hidden. You simply operated under the false assumption that nobody was watching you back in the Ukrainian dugout. The flight crew remained completely unaware of the digital transaction that had just occurred to them. The mission was going perfectly. They marked the final Russian gun truck, fed the telemetry to their artillery line, and shifted their full attention to the primary target, the airfield. They had absolutely no idea they had just broadcast their own home address to the enemy, and the hunt for them was already underway. The physical path to the airfield was clear. But as the Ukrainian drone wave pushed past the outer corridor, they entered a sector of the battle space where simply being tactically correct doesn't keep you alive. The moment the 11 FP2 drones crossed an invisible boundary layer, their onboard satellite navigation completely dropped offline. The global positioning system GPS coordinates vanished. The heading hold function failed. The automated flight control systems began desperately groping for a space-based signal that no longer existed. For a few triumphant seconds, the Russian electronic warfare teams watching their jamming monitors had every reason to believe they had just secured a decisive victory. They were entirely wrong. The FP2S didn't waver. They kept flying arrow straight through the intense electromagnetic noise, completely locked onto their original flight path. The massive jamming field that should have blinded them didn't matter in the slightest because these platforms weren't navigating by satellites at all. In the tree line far below, a specialized Russian jamming truck, equipped with a thick cluster of heavy high-power emitters, was flooding the sky with artificial white noise on all primary satellite frequencies. This immense power is designed to bury the incredibly faint signals traveling down from GPS satellites in orbit. This specific layered jamming network has successfully degraded Western precision-guided munitions that cost over 100 times what these drones do. Imagine trying to hear a whisper from your dashboard GPS while 1,000 people are screaming completely different directions directly into your ears. The small-nose camera had transitioned entirely to automatic target recognition software. The drone's onboard digital brain had already memorized exactly what the target looked like from its pre-flight briefings. It held that exact visual memory all the way through the high-speed descent. Cutting the radio signal in the final seconds didn't matter anymore. The human operator had flown the machine 99% of the way and selected the high-value target. He then handed the final terminal moments over to the autonomous machine, a second FP to slam directly into a massive mobile crane, folding the heavy steel structure onto its side in a mangled heap of twisted metal. Now, a crane is not an explosive launcher, but it was by far the smartest target on the airfield. You cannot hand-load a shaped drone onto a launch rail. The composite airframe combined with the heavy warhead weighs well over 100 kilograms. The launch rail sits at a steep upward angle, and no human crew can muscle that massive weight up the guide tracks manually. It requires specialized mechanical lift equipment to perform the task, wreck the cranes, and the entire logistical site chokes to death. Even if every single launch rail on the field survives the day untouched, you don't have to burn down the entire bakery if you simply steal the ovens. This is what modern fire control actually means. You don't chase an individual truck. You take the entire mechanical machine apart piece by piece until none of it works. A multi-million-dollar launcher with no crane to load, it is nothing more than an expensive flatbed trailer parked in the open, waiting for a tow truck that is never going to arrive. The strike wave was within minutes of completion when the Rubikon officer, running completely out of options to save his airfield, abandoned the airspace entirely, hand-directed heavy artillery salvos straight toward the calculated Ukrainian dugout coordinates. Heavy high explosive shells began walking their way toward the bunker. Inside the dugout, the crew read the situation instantly. The Russians had given up on intercepting the drones and had come to kill the men. If those heavy guns were allowed to range in completely unanswered, the next full salvo would land directly on top of the dugout group. But a heavy Ukrainian artillery battery hammered back in reply before the second Russian salvo could even impact the ground. The Ukrainians could execute a counter-strike that fast because of their counter-battery radar system of flat, rotating active array mounted on the truck chassis hidden a few kilometers back. It tracks incoming enemy shells while they are still in mid-flight and mathematically calculates their ballistic arc backward to the exact square meter they were fired from. This provides the Ukrainian gun crews with an instantaneous target solution before the Russian artillerymen can even pack up their equipment and flee. The operators only had to survive the incoming fire long enough for the terminal wave to finish its work. That was the entire game now. Stay alive for 2 more minutes. Across the airfield, the remaining FP2S tore through the launch chain in perfect sequence. The transport trucks with their armed Shaheds exploded first, followed by the packed motor pool, then the remaining cranes. Last came the reinforced concrete bunkers. The stored munitions inside detonated in massive secondary explosions that ripped fire, concrete, and metal debris hundreds of meters straight into the morning sky. By the spring, the Russian military had converted this specific base into an absolute fortress. Dozens of hardened shelters, permanent concrete launch pads, reinforced bunkers, the exact kind of massive military build-out that requires months of labor and millions of dollars to complete. And the single strike wave that completely dismantled it cost less than a single night of standard defensive operations. 11 drones at $50,000 each. $500,000 of low-cost hardware deployed against a strategic fortress that cost tens of millions too. Construct. Every single warhead slammed home exactly where the remote operators had pointed. Then, before the jamming ever started, the airfield's entire operational footprint collapsed in on itself. Everything that put terror over Ukrainian cities was systematically erased in a few violent, calculated minutes. The final FP to impacted its target just as the Ukrainian operators, scorched, covered in concrete dust, and half blinded by smoke, clawed their way clear of the collapsing dugout entrance and dragged themselves into the safety of the nearby tree line. Behind them, the airfield was finished. They were no longer inside the bunker when the final Russian heavy artillery shells walked directly through the roof where they had been sitting just moments prior. The strike on their own position had missed them by a margin you could measure in single-digit seconds. A few seconds the other way, and this is a completely different story, the kind that ends with empty chairs at a briefing table behind the lines. But it didn't go the other way this time. 40 kilometers back, the Rubikon signals officer, who had spent his entire morning hunting those specific men, stared silently at a monitor displaying a burning, shattered airfield he could no longer use. The Shaheds that flew out of this sector night after night, the ones that had been sending thousands of innocent families running into cold stairwells before dawn, would not be launching from this field again. Downrange, the cities this base had been hammering for months received their very first quiet, peaceful night in a very long time. If you found this deep tactical breakdown valuable, then hit that subscribe button for World News Now and check out our channel for more coverage on modern electronic and autonomous warfare. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you on the next brief.